Hey everyone, welcome to the Industry Show. I'm your host Nitin Bajaj, and joining me today is Bala Kamallakharan. Bala, welcome on the show.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you, Bala. So let's start with who is Bala?
Well, Bala is Bala in Iceland. I moved here quite some years ago, 16 years back. But in a very short word, Bala is an investor in people. Has been doing that for over a decade now, and continue to really get inspired by doing that and building a startup ecosystem in Iceland.
And I know none of what you do is easy, and we would love to hear more about that. But now that we know a little bit about Bala, let's play a little game. In one word, underrated or overrated? This is about the 10 or so different themes that impact us as a community. And I'll throw these at you and would love a one word response to it. Ready?
Sure, go for it.
All right, let's do this. Let's start with
Mm.
DEI. Yeah.
It's underrated.
All right. I love the spirit. Stock market
Mm.
prices.
Overrated.
Okay. Metaverse.
Uh, Underrated.
Startup valuations.
Oh, overrated. Out of this world.
Interesting
Depends
coming
on where
from
you
you.
are.
What about cash?
Mm, I think overrated.
Okay. The great resignation.
Underrated.
Okay. Stakeholder capitalism.
Um, Underrated.
Okay. Uh, what about crypto?
Underrated.
Okay. Real estate prices.
Depends on where you are. If it's Reykjavik, it's extremely overrated. But maybe it changes which zip code you're in.
True, but in general, at least I have not got exposed to somewhere where it's not right now in this market.
Yeah,
Uh, Following up on that,
it is quite.
inflation.
Yeah. Oh, underrated.
Okay, and then NFT.
Underrated.
Okay, hey, that was a lot of fun. Thanks for playing along, and I really appreciate it. So
Yeah, thank you.
now
Have made
let's.
me think, even though I had only one word.
Well, that's kind of the point, right? That it's fun, but also it gives me all of these different perspectives from around the world sitting right here while having fun. So thanks for playing again. Now, let's talk something closer and more personal to you. What is Startup Iceland?
Yeah. So I started this initiative almost a decade back.
Mhm.
This is right after I'd invested in one of the startups in Iceland. The story of how I got started maybe is too long-winded for this interview. But I realized it takes a village to actually start a startup and make it successful. So I said maybe we should try to get every founder in Iceland to gather in one place and let's celebrate the idea of starting new. And I have to give context. This was in 2009, 2010. Iceland had just gone through a massive financial collapse.
Mhm.
A lot of the people were kind of drawing on strings, find their foothold. The world was pretty fluid here and quite, should I say, uncertain. But what was very certain to me at that time was founders and people who are starting new things is how we're going to get out of the mess. And I thought it would be a good idea to get them all together. And that's what led to Startup Iceland. Also, while I'd invested in this startup, I noticed that the founders did not have a network outside of Iceland. And to build a global company, you need to build a network.
Mhm.
So I thought, what's a better way to do this and invite people from all over the world to come to Iceland? And we hold like a conference, a TED style conference where we share stories, connect with people, learn from each other, and hopefully, as they say, break bread and build those relationships, which would help us build an ecosystem. And so that's how it started. We have done the event for about 9 years, and COVID kind of put a dampener on that.
Mhm.
But the offshoot of that is founders from Iceland have built networks all over the world now. The ecosystem has evolved to a point where it is quite quite vibrant, which was always the mission. But then again, there are various degrees of vibrancy, and we continue to encourage people, mostly students. Actually, we spend a lot of time in the university. I teach how to start a startup in Reykjavik University, and we encourage students to participate in hackathons. We want to encourage everybody to become builders and makers. I think that's how we will remake the world. I don't think it's going to happen if we all just sit still and do nothing. I just think that that makes logical sense. But of course, what to focus on, how to do it, all those things are up for grabs. Anybody can decide how to do that. So we encourage that. So Startup Iceland was basically built with that in mind. And, it morphed into lots of things because
Mhm.
when I first started, I started blogging about what was going on in Iceland. I actually won the Best Tech Journalist in Iceland award. I was not a journalist. So when I received the award, I basically said, I have no ambition of becoming a journalist, and I'm not a journalist. I just happen to write about what is going on in our backyard. And I encouraged all the journalists to start writing about startups and founders. So that part of my journey stopped after that award. I didn't have to do it anymore. So somebody else took on the baton and ran with it. But in the heart of things, my ambition and drive was always to fix kind of an injustice that we see in every community, every society. Like, let's say you go into a new ecosystem, you're brand new, you don't know anybody there. How do you build those relationships? How do you, who's the one who's going to extend the first handshake and say, hey, welcome, let's get started? So Startup Iceland was supposed to be that. And it has played its role very well. Lots more people have gotten connected with founders and others within the ecosystem, and we continue to do that. And as I said, I don't think the journey has stopped. I think we're probably midway. We've got another decade to go.
Yeah. Well, kudos for what you have accomplished in this past decade and looking forward to this continued success in the coming 10 years. It really takes a village to build this ecosystem which you have. Now, if you were to quantify the impact of what has been accomplished in this past decade, and I understand, I appreciate it's hard, but if you were to put some metrics behind it, how would you define those?
I mean, it's again, this is it's kind of like building a city, right? Let's
Yeah.
assume that you first land in this barren land, and there's nothing there, and you making a first step in, say, let's say you build a shop, and by doing that, you kind of shown a model for others to follow.
Mhm.
So the impact to yourself might be just the shop, but 10 years down the road,
Mhm.
lots of things get built based on that foundation. I think that at least Startup Iceland was that catalyst that kind of changed the mindset of lots of people in Iceland that this can be done out of Iceland. And if I have to put very simple metrics on that, I mean, I've thousands of entrepreneurs and founders have gone through the event, and I think that in itself is a major win.
True.
Lots of startups have been founded. Lots of investors have invested in the startups who met during the event. The connections made during the event has created tremendous economic value. If Startup Iceland had not done its job, I don't think today Iceland will have maybe 5 or 6 privately funded local venture capital companies who raised money from pension funds and actually deploy it into founders building companies out of Iceland. And we're talking about almost $1 billion today. And I remember very distinctly when I started, there was actually one venture capital company, and that was a government-run venture capital company. And the fund size of that venture capital company was $10 million. Today, we have multiplied that by a factor of, I don't know, what, 10,000?
Yeah.
Within 10 years. So I think
huge.
I mean, I can't take credit for all of that, but I can say that somebody has to be the fire starter. Somebody had to be the crazy one to actually go and do that crazy dance first. Yeah. And I can always take credit for that crazy dance because nobody else did it before. So once I did it, everybody else started following that. Mm-hmm. And I think it is easy to copy a model than to start a new one. And in that regard, I think Startup Iceland played a very big role. But I was obviously inspired by a lot of people. It was not just me; it was lots of other people, and I just happened to kind of, take the bait, if you will.
True, and I think it's at the end of the day not really the metrics or the numbers, but the fact that it's possible, the faith that a nation can come together and do this. And the most cool part is that you were the most instrumental in making this happen and making this a reality.
Right. Yeah. I would definitely agree. I actually wrote a blog post, and I think that was kind of like the ruse. I kind of noticed that I'd kind of, I don't know, maybe woken up something within the community. Mm-hmm. I wrote a blog post with the title, "The next Google can be built in Iceland." And suddenly there was lots of people. And by the way, when I started the blog, probably few people, my wife and maybe a couple of my friends read the blog. But this blog post had like, I think 5,000 or 10,000 people who read it. And it was mostly in Iceland. So I kind of knew that I'd kind of struck a chord somewhere. So people were looking for somebody to have a vision, somebody to kind of show what should we be doing. And I do believe that, and founders are, they were there, they were building companies. It just kind of gave them that spark, right? They kind of started believing. Right. And a lot of times I have realized that just encouraging the potential in people and believing in them and telling them, you know what, nobody knows anything anyway. So might as well go and build something and do something, and you learn something along the way. And I think that's a great way to get started. And maybe that's something that I inherently had in me because because somebody believed in me, right? That's how we are all here. Yep. And I happened to just pass it on and just pay it forward by saying, somebody believed in me and said I could do something, and then I did it. And the same thing that we can do to the others that we meet. So maybe in a shorter form, that was kind of like the change, and it has kind of made a big impact, right? Because all the way from the president of Iceland to a taxi driver today in Iceland. Not that taxi drivers in Iceland are any low category people or anything of that sort. It's just that the pay grade, if you will, is very different. And some of my good friends are taxi drivers. The real thing is that all of them know startups and technology. They understand that this is a world that is changing the future of Iceland. And I think that is, you can't put any monetary impact on that. I just think that it is just a very, you just have to be at the right time at the right place, or wrong time at the right place, or wrong time at the wrong place, depending on what you want to get out of it. But it has served me well in terms of just my own purpose, my own inspiration, and me continuing to, push the boundaries of what's possible and what's not possible.
I think the one key takeaway from this is you've been at the epicenter of all of this, and everyone from the taxi driver to the president knows that it's you at the center of all of this when it comes to startups. And that's a pretty cool place to be in. Kudos for that.
It was more the fruit of the labor, right?
True.
It was never the intention,
Yeah.
but it so happened that that's what resulted.
Through this 10-year journey, where do you think you stand today? What is the biggest challenge, not just for Startup Iceland, but as an ecosystem? What would you say is the most pressing thing?
I mean, obviously, I'm a venture investor. I run a small seed fund, and we have invested in really early stage companies. And the biggest challenge is, you know, because none of this has been built yet,
Mhm.
you need to have the same enthusiasm as you did when you get started throughout the journey. That's a big challenge, right? I mean, keeping the same energy level while you're building, from first day to the time, whatever may be the milestone, maybe going IPO or doing something of that sort. By the way, IPO is not the real metric. The real metric is when you go to IPO, what it means is that you have impacted the lives of a lot of people in whatever that you built. And I think that's a good thing to do either way. So the big challenge I would see is just continuing that energy. I think anybody everywhere, anywhere today, I think technology has been democratized. Anyone who has access to the internet and has access to a computer can create economic value. And I think that is a pretty amazing thing that we see today. And there are lots of people that I always, at least it used to bother me when I started, but no longer. It doesn't bother me anymore. I just, I just don't think about them at all. The people who are naysayers, like who have not given any thought, and then they kind of say, well, it's not possible.
Yep.
And I always think that that's also a big challenge. There's lots of people, as somebody told me, somebody who has not given it much thought is very quick to come to a decision. But
Yeah.
somebody who's actually given it a lot of thought and worked on it has to deliberate before making a decision because they understand more. And so those are, in my opinion, big challenges that we face today. And I think everybody has to think for themselves. I think we are we are in the world where there is access to almost unlimited information,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean it's knowledge or wisdom, right?
Exactly.
Information is just information. Knowledge and wisdom, you have to kind of weave it together and make your own thought process and actually do the scientific approach to ask whether it's true or facts. All those things today, we're seeing that a lot of us are not doing. And I think that's a big
Mhm.
challenge, right? When we have to solve big problems, we cannot jump to easy conclusions. We have to really deliberate and go deep in and maintain that energy and do it in a civil way and be kind and and engage in I don't know, civil disagreements, as
Yeah.
they say.
Yeah.
All those things are, in my opinion, big challenges today because as I see it, this is not going to get resolved itself. Everybody has to make an effort to resolve it.
True. And also to your point, it's not just that it's having to commit to doing this hard work, and not just because it worked for somebody else, it is going to work for you because it really has to be relevant to this context. And as we talk about challenges, we also talk about opportunities. What do you think is the biggest and most exciting opportunity lying ahead of you?
As Charles Dickens said, it's the best of times and it's the
Yeah.
worst of times.
Yes.
I do believe it is the best of times, primarily because, as I mentioned before, technology has been democratized, right? I think today, anybody, anywhere in the world who can possibly spend time and learn and has the drive can create economic value for themselves and for everybody around them. That is a very unprecedented time that we live in. I just don't think that it was always the case.
Mhm.
I think today that is the case. You can, all you need to do is spend some time on the Web 3.0 or the crypto world, and you will realize there are plenty of things that needs to be built. and anybody who's willing to take the time to build it will derive economic value. I'm not talking about speculation. I'm not talking about, buying a token or speculating on a token. I'm talking about building some real things that people want. Like, we encourage all founders that we work to say, build something that the world wants. Doesn't know it wants yet, but you need to be able to do that. And today it's never been easy to do that. But of course, commit time to do it, commit effort to do it, commit, just like getting good at any skill. You want to play basketball and you really want to compete. Guess what? You got to work on the skills. Yep. You wanna get good at chess. Guess what? You gotta do the work. The same is true in the startup/technology entrepreneurship world, because that's the world I live in. I call all founders my tribe. So those are the tribe of people that I kind of gravitate towards, because they're builders, they're makers, they're problem solvers. And I think those are the people we need. There's nothing wrong with other things, but I don't know, thinking about Catch-22 and how the world can be very easily defined by different ships we get on.
Makes sense. And, Bala, as you look back in the rearview mirror and think about things that worked and some that did not, what is one lesson learned, but also a success story that you're really proud of and you should show off a little bit? We'd love to see both sides of it.
Yeah. Again, I think when I look back, every team that I have committed time and money to work with has been a fantastic learning experience. I think the first investment I made, I think I should tell the story, because for anybody who wants to start on this, it might be a good way to learn quickly. So I knew nothing about venture investing. I knew nothing about startups. I'd never built a company myself. I had no idea. But I used to work for a bank, so we used to fund a lot of businesses. So, I just thought that just because I did that. But by the way, I used to work in management consulting. I advised a lot of big companies. So the confidence of being able to look at a problem and being a problem solver, I said, how difficult a startup can be. I mean, big deal, right? I started working with a team, and they were raising money, and I had no money to start with. And I told them that I was an investor. I convinced them to work with me on because I saw that they needed work. They made a pitch deck, and that pitch deck was incomplete. It needed some work. So I basically just worked with them to build the pitch deck. And I took the pitch deck and I actually pitched it to my family, basically my cousin back in India. And I literally, begged him to give me some money to go and invest in this team. And he just took pity on me and said, okay, fine, go do something with it. And he gave me, I think a few $100,000 and said, go do it. So to tell you how much of a noob I was, I took the entire money and I wrote one check into this team, and just started working with them. And by the way, it was great to write that check, to get in and started working. The only problem was, 6-7 months into it, we ran out of the money. So we were staring into the abyss of going bankrupt, because we had, 6 to 10 people working. And, by the way, we were gaining customers, but we were still burning money. So I was literally, I had no idea what to do. And I because I used to work for a bank, I knew some investors and I knew people who had money. I ran around to all of them, and all of them very politely told me to get out of the room, very politely. And so that's a lesson for somebody to take on. You have to build a network of investors before you start investing. If you don't do that and you just go head in and you just start doing it, you will find that this can be a tremendously hard journey.
Yeah.
Luckily, as they say, I was able to find a way to solve the problem. I'm saying I, but it was the team
Right.
and everybody who was part of that team that solved the problem. We raised additional funding. We did all kinds of clever, creative things to keep the company up and running until we raised the money. And we raised the money, and then within another year, that company was acquired by a Nasdaq listed company. And when I look back, that company, the first company, is where I had the most learnings because it was terribly, terribly hard. I literally every night I would just literally cry to sleep because I had no resort. I didn't know how to solve this problem, but we were somehow able to solve it. And when I look back, that company was the first company in the 1,000-year-old history of Iceland to be acquired into Silicon Valley.
Wow.
And I was, this was my first investment, and we somehow landed it. And so that was a fantastic experience. And it was, looking back, I would say I learned a lot of things, but I keep making other different mistakes.
Sure.
So that's
Isn't that
the
where the fun
startup
is?
journey.
Yeah.
It is about that. I mean, what I'm maybe really proud of is the fact that I never gave up on any founder I invested. Never given up on them. I never give up on them. Even when they themselves start doubting, I'm always the one saying, no, I'm not giving up on you. I'm here. So let's get to work and let's figure that out. That's something that I'm really proud of because I never gave up on any of the teams, and all of them have landed. So that is, again, something that I'm extremely proud of. That's because, as I said before, when you start believing in a version of the future and you keep working towards that, suddenly that future manifests itself. And it's true with people, it's true with ideas, it's true with anything. And I think, if anything, I would encourage everybody to, give more belief, have faith, and push forward, and you'll find the way.
I think that's extremely important as an investor to have that confidence and that perspective. When we deal with this imposter syndrome from time to time, and as confident as we may be at the beginning, we do tend to question ourselves, our capabilities, and our environment. And, to have that person be there to remind you, to be that North Star for you, especially if that's your investor who's doing that for you, can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I just think that I wish, and this is probably maybe advice to founders and entrepreneurs and startup people who are working on these things. When you are looking to raise money and you start talking to investors, look for the kind of people that will do that for you, right? I mean,
Not just
as
a
you
check.
probably not just to check. I think that the check part, I'm not trying to say that it's not important. I think it is important, but what is more important is the kind of person you want to work with. And I'm extremely picky about the founders I work with, because if I feel in my gut that they're not gonna fit, I usually just walk out, even though it might be the best deal in town. And I always say, for me, all this is not that important. Yes, money, economics are important, but end of the day, you need to be able to sleep well. You need to build relationships. And I tell this to founders, what? I write the check. This is early check, but the only requirement I have is 10 years from now, we should be able to look each other in the eye, break bread, give each other a hug, and say, what, we gave it all, and let's see what happened. Right? I think that's important from a personal point of view, and I make sure that founders understand that. It's end of the day, this is a people business. I think people totally forget
Mm-hmm.
that end of the day, on the other side of the table is a person. And with all this money and valuation and billions and unicorns and all that stuff, we forget that we're all just small kids. We just need to figure that part out.
So simple, yet so profound. And that brings us to my favorite part of the show, one line life lessons, right? These are, again, extremely simple, straightforward, but profound and often life changing. Bala, we would love to hear your one line life lessons.
Sure. Um, Again, I think a lot of these sayings me have a lot more depth, and I've used them with the founders I work with all the time.
Mhm.
We always say that bad news never gets good with time,
Yes.
right? Bad news is bad news. You deal
Yep.
with it right now, and you basically have to make an action. You have to resort to doing something. So the one liner is bad news never gets good with time.
Yep.
And the other one that I really like is common sense is not common practice. You
Yes.
know, everybody talks about common sense, but very few people actually put it into practice. And one more thing that I've always said, being contrarian is easy,
Mhm.
but being contrarian and right is hard. Is very hard, right? So you got to really do the work to be right about being a contrarian. And unfortunately or fortunately, the venture world, you have to be a contrarian.
Mhm.
You just gotta have to think differently about it. So this is something that is close to me.
True.
And I know we talked about it before. It's easy to copy a model than to build one.
Mhm.
And then we also, and the future doesn't get built by itself, right?
Yep.
Doesn't get built by itself. Somebody has to do it.
Mhm.
And these are all common things that I remind myself every day, and hopefully hopefully it's useful. and, and
It
and
is.
last but not least,
Yeah.
uh, disenchantment is not wisdom,
Love that.
right? The reason I really gravitate towards that one liner is because I used to work in a bank, and in the bank there are various groups of people, and the credit managers are my favorite groups of people because they are what I call pessimistic optimists,
Yep.
right? They always think about all the things that can possibly go wrong in the world and
Mhm.
why they shouldn't do something, right?
Yep.
And why, if you do that long enough, right, what happens is you kind of just become a kind of person, but nobody wants to be around. you know, you you just don't want to be around these people because it's just always about how the glass is half empty. You
Yep.
know, and only optimists build the future. Pessimists never build the future,
True.
right? And the future that we want. So, and then they become, and when people stop being closer to them, then they become kind of disenchanted. And
Even
because
more.
they get to make decisions, they kind of personify that that's wisdom. And the truth cannot be far from that, right? The truth is far from that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be prudent, doesn't mean you
Mhm.
shouldn't be careful, does not mean that you shouldn't analyze things, but you also need to have an open mind to say, you know what, yes, all the things can go wrong, but what if it works?
Actually, that's the true spirit of entrepreneurship, right? We know we are going to fall, we know we are going to face hurdles, but it's really about getting up again and again and again and again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You gotta have that mindset. If you don't have that mindset, this becomes a very lonely, long road, and then you never see the end.
Well, thanks for sharing those one liners with us. And for our audience, we have an entire collection at onelinelifelessons.com and pretty much everywhere where you socialize digitally. Uh, Bala, thanks again for being with us. We really appreciate it. Good luck on the next 10 years. And we'd love to have you come back on and talk about more successes and more lessons.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun, and cannot wait to get back and chat more about the paints. There's lots.